Hey, there you are. I'm Matthew. Pleasure to meet you. So, are you ready for your insider's tour of Washington, D.C.? That's great. All right, well, let's begin. Here's where I work. The United States Capitol. Well, technically, I work here. The Hart Senate Office Building, where I'm a legislative aide for Senator Lautenberg. Huh? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. That is an excellent question. In fact, there are many challenges the Senate faces when it comes to world affairs. The Washington Monument, gorgeous. You know, in Washington's farewell address, he cautioned Americans about political parties. He was concerned that political parties created divisions that prevented consensus. Now, over 200 years later, Washington's warning has shown real consequences, specifically the legislative gridlock in the Senate. It is absolutely imperative that political parties in the Senate resolve their differences in order to avoid creating international crises. Let me give you an example. For instance, the Senate's failure to pass a budget in over 3 years leads international investors to question whether America has the resolve to pass a plan that reinvigorates its economy. This lack of confidence ripples through international financial markets, resulting in effects like rising interest rates and food prices, as well as decreased lending. Just a small spike in interest rates could cause debtor nations like Greece to default, and in turn thrust the world back into global recession. For lower income countries, recession could intensify already present political and social instability, and in turn engender violent conflict, none of which are good for America or the world. Behind me is John Paul Jones, considered the father of the U.S. Navy. Jones earned his reputation during a naval engagement at the time of the American Revolution. Jones, outmatched, outgunned, and with his ship sinking, looked directly at the opposing British vessel and screamed, "I have yet begun to fight." Amazingly, Jones strategized, employing every resource to eventually overcome his adversary. Although the American economy is far from a sinking ship, the Senate faces a similar test of wills in repairing it. Under extreme pressure to both raise revenue and cut spending, sculpting a budget without undermining America's geopolitical strategy will be a very difficult task for the Senate. Let's examine some of its options. One option would be discouraging outsourcing, which could bring back some resources and jobs to the United States. But at the same time, it would take away the factory wage that many workers abroad depend on to stay out of destitute poverty. One other option would be to cut U.S. foreign aid. Now, this may allay some of America's rising debt. However, this aid funds critical initiatives around the globe that saves millions of people from almost certain starvation. So like Jones, America has to be extremely astute if it is to craft a budget that avoids isolating its foreign partners as well as stifling development. Ta-da! I saved the best for last. You know, being here reminds me of Senator Paul recently filibustering the nomination of now CIA Director John Brennan. His actions ultimately forced the White House to clarify its authority to assassinate an American citizen suspected of terrorism. Now, many political pundits decried Senator Paul's filibuster as either paranoid or politically motivated. That all may be true, but no one can deny that the White House's efforts to combat terrorism increasingly raise moral and ethical questions at home and abroad. As seen with the White House's reluctant response to Senator Paul, the Senate faces a major challenge in checking executive power to wage war and direct U.S. military assets, especially because its tactics, although morally questionable, are guided by the real need to protect U.S. citizens and support nations that are battling to maintain their way of life against militant jihadist movements. Nevertheless, it is paramount that the Senate establish rules of engagement for the 21st century battlefield, which ensure executive accountability and preserve America's image abroad as a defender of human rights and justice. Spreading these ideals is what instigated the U.S. campaign to defeat terrorism in the very first place, and the Senate can never let the White House forget that. Now, I really appreciate you joining me today, and in the famous words of John McLaughlin,
the American
bye-bye.
original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest mind.